The learning target for this video is students will be able to determine the opposite leg, adjacent leg, and hypotenuse given an angle of reference for a right triangle. Today's learning target is really a building block for our next unit of study, which will be right triangle trigonometry. So let's start with some definitions. First off, right triangle we know is a triangle that has a right angle, and we know how to find the hypotenuse of a right triangle. It is the side that is opposite the right angle. So another trick is if you put your thumb on the right angle, you're touching two sides of the right triangle. The two sides you're touching we call the legs of the right triangle. And the side that you're not touching is always the hypotenuse. All right. So the hypotenuse is the hypotenuse. That's not going to change. And next, we have what's called the angle of reference we're going to be using. So this angle of reference is going to be one of the two acute angles. So in this example, we're using this angle X as our angle of reference. So why that's important is we're going to determine we have two legs. One of the legs is going to be called the opposite leg, and the other leg is going to be called the adjacent leg. So when I use this angle X as my angle of reference, the opposite leg is a leg that is across from that angle. So you can see from this angle of reference, I go across. That is the opposite leg. The adjacent leg is the leg that's next to the angle of reference. So in this example, again, angle X is my angle of reference. Well, there's two sides that are basically connected to that angle, right, or included with that angle. But one is the hypotenuse. So it's the side that's not the hypotenuse, that's with that angle of reference, that we will call the adjacent leg. So the angle of reference does make a difference. So it will not change the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is the hypotenuse, but here I have triangle ABC twice. The first one on the left here, we're using angle A as our angle of reference. So you can see that side BC is our opposite leg, and side AC is our adjacent leg. But now look at the right triangle to the right side. It's also the same triangle, triangle ABC, but this time our angle of reference is angle B. Well, look what happens. The side opposite angle B is opposite. So in this case, segment AC is our opposite leg, and our adjacent leg is segment BC. So the opposite and adjacent will flip-flop depending on which angle of reference we use. Again, we only use one of the acute angles as the angle of reference. The right angle will never be the angle of reference. And we know that the hypotenuse will always be the hypotenuse, right? It doesn't change. It's the side that is across from the right angle or opposite the right angle. So that's not going to change. Now, the orientation of the right triangle is going to come at you in many different ways. So one way to quickly determine what side's which is to use the thumb method. So if you put your thumb on the right angle, the sides that you're touching are the legs. The side that you're not touching is always the hypotenuse. Well, when you put your thumb on the angle of reference, so if I put it on angle A, then the side I'm not touching is BC. So segment BC is the opposite leg. Look at the one on the right. If I use the angle B as my angle of reference, when I put my thumb on angle B, I'm touching two sides of the right triangle. The side I am not touching is my opposite leg. Now, the adjacent leg, you just need to know the hypotenuse. So when I put my finger on the angle of reference, I'm always going to be touching the adjacent leg and the hypotenuse. So as long as I know which one is the hypotenuse, then I know the other side is the adjacent leg each and every time. So let's try a few here. And if you make mistakes, that's okay. It's part of the learning process. You're going to get immediate feedback in this video as you're going through the process. So I'm hoping by the end of the video, you could tell me with very high accuracy rate what is the hypotenuse, what's the opposite side, and what is the adjacent side. All right, so here's our triangle. We have triangle ABC. My first question for you is, what side is the hypotenuse? I hope you came up with segment AC is the hypotenuse. Okay, now I'm going to tell you the angle of reference is this angle C. Angle C is our angle of reference. So with that in mind, which side is our opposite leg? So side AB is our opposite leg, because if I put my finger on angle C, the side I'm not touching is AB. So that is our opposite. And then once we have those two, our adjacent is what's left over. So we know that segment BC is our adjacent leg. All right, here we have triangle PQR. Tell me, what is the hypotenuse for this triangle? So side PR, or segment PR, is the hypotenuse for this triangle. It is the side that's opposite that 90-degree angle. All right, this time, tell me the adjacent leg. What side is the adjacent leg? And my angle of reference we're using is angle R. So angle R is our angle of reference. What is the adjacent leg? So the adjacent leg is segment QR. Again, if I put my thumb on the angle of reference, you're touching two sides. You're always going to be touching the hypotenuse and the adjacent leg. So we already knew the hypotenuse, so it had to be side QR is the only other side that's connected to that angle. So that is the adjacent leg QR. Now, if I ask you for the opposite leg or the opposite side from the angle of reference, that's the side that's across from it. So again, if you use your thumb method, your thumb's on angle R, the side you're not touching is the opposite leg. And so that would have been PQ. Segment PQ is your opposite leg. All right, last one. Let's see if you can get perfect accuracy this time, if you haven't already. So we have triangle XYZ. It's a right triangle. My angle of reference is going to be angle X is my angle of reference. So can you tell me what side is the opposite leg? Segment YZ is our opposite leg. Now can you tell me what side is our adjacent leg? Okay, our adjacent leg is segment XZ. So again, if I put my thumb on the angle of reference, the side I was not touching was the opposite leg. And then when I put my thumb on that angle of reference, angle X in this case, I'm touching two sides. I know I'm always touching the adjacent and the hypotenuse. So the reason why I chose XZ for the adjacent is because I know that XY is my hypotenuse. So XY is your hypotenuse. So there's no rules to what order you need to do these in. A lot of students like to find the hypotenuse first and then go and find the other ones. Others can just go right away and find the opposite and adjacent right away. As you get more experience with this, you'll be able to do it fairly quickly. But this, again, this is a key skill we need to have as we begin our unit on right triangle trigonometry. We'll be talking about this in class.